like to believe that human civilization is held together by a complex web of laws, morality, and a social contract. We think that people behave themselves because they have a deep, inherent respect for order, but that is a lie. Civilization is not held together by morality. Civilization is held together by pricing. The only reason your local city center doesn't devolve into a feral apocalyptic gladiator arena every Friday night is because alcohol is expensive. When a beer costs $8, there is a natural financial limit to how much chaos a human being can consume. The economy acts as a babysitter for our darkest, most primitive instincts. But what happens when a corporation decides to remove that financial barrier? What happens when a desperate business decides to practically give away the chemical fuel for a human madness? Welcome to the Intoxicated Void. Today we're traveling to Cleveland, Ohio in the summer of 1974. We're going to look at a promotional event organized by a professional baseball team that went so spectacularly, violently wrong, it essentially turned a sports stadium into a war zone. In this video, we are going to explore the legendary 10-cent beer night. We will look at the terrifying biological math of unlimited cheap alcohol, the absolute collapse of stadium security, and the surreal moment when rival professional athletes had to arm themselves with wooden bats to fight back-to-back just to survive a mob of their own fans. If you work in marketing, take notes. This is how you accidentally fund a riot. To understand the sheer, unadulterated stupidity of this event, you have to understand the context of Cleveland in 1974. The 1970s were not a great time for Cleveland. A few years earlier, the Cuyahoga River had literally caught on fire because it was so polluted with industrial waste. The city was economically depressed, and to make matters worse, their baseball team, the Cleveland Indians, were terrible. The team was playing in a massive 74,000-seat municipal stadium, but they were only drawing about 8,000 fans a game. The stadium was a ghost town. The management was bleeding money, and they were desperate. So the front office had a brainstorming session. They needed a gimmick to put bodies in the seats. Now I want you to imagine the corporate hallucination that took place in that boardroom. A group of executives in cheap 70s suits looking at a spreadsheet and saying, "You know what this depressed, angry Rust Belt city needs? We need to invite 25,000 people into a concrete bowl and sell them 12-ounce cups of Stroh's beer for a dime." Regular beer prices at the stadium were 65 cents. 10 cents was a staggering 85% discount. Now the management wasn't completely insane. They instituted a rule. You could only buy 6 beer per purchase. Now let us review the flawless logic of this safety protocol. Attention fans, to ensure a family-friendly environment, you are strictly limited to purchasing 6 beers at a time. However, you may return to the concession stand an infinite number of times. For one single American dollar, you can purchase 10 beers. For $5, you can purchase a medically induced coma. They can essentially remove the financial ceiling of intoxication, but cheap beer alone doesn't start a riot. You need a spark, you need an enemy. If you're going to host a night of unlimited, practically free alcohol, you should probably schedule it against a boring, neutral opponent. The Cleveland Indians scheduled a 10-cent beer night for Tuesday, June 4, 1974. The opponent, the Texas Rangers. This was absolutely worst possible matchup in the history of sports. Just 1 week prior, the Indians had played the Rangers in Texas. During that game, a massive bench-clearing brawl erupted. The players were throwing punches and fans were throwing beer, and the tension was electric. After the brawl in Texas, the Rangers manager, a notoriously aggressive man named Billy Martin, was interviewed by the press. When asked if he was worried about retaliation when his team traveled to Cleveland the following week, Martin scoffed. He told the reporters they don't have enough fans to worry about. Welcome to the Vengeance Void. You do not insult the pride of a Rust Belt city. The local Cleveland media printed Billy Martin's quote everywhere. Local radio DJs whipped the city into frenzy. So on the evening of June 4th, 25,000 Cleveland fans showed up to the stadium. They didn't show up to watch baseball. They showed up because they were angry. They had been insulted by a Texan, and they had pockets full of dimes. The atmosphere wasn't a sporting event, it was a powder keg waiting for a match. And the management of Cleveland Indians had just provided 25,000 matches served in 12-ounce plastic cups. The game started, and the beer started flowing. Because the stadium was severely understaffed, the lines for the concession stands grew massive. Fans realized that waiting in line for 10 minutes just to get 6 beers was inefficient, so they started pooling their money. One guy would go to the front, slap down a $2 bill and walk away with 20 cups of beer, passing them back through the crowd. By the second inning, the inebriation void had completely swallowed the stadium. The fans weren't just drunk, they were achieving a level of collective feral intoxication that borders on the mythological. And because they were drinking so fast, they had to use restrooms, but the restrooms were full, so the fans simply started urinating in the empty sections of the stadium, in the stairwells, and on the concourses. By the fourth inning, the social contract officially snapped. A woman ran into the field, ran straight to the umpire's circle, lifted shirt, flashed the umpires and tried to kiss one of them. The crowd roared. A few minutes later, a naked man sprinted across the outfield. Then another. Streaking was popular 1970s fad, but this was becoming a synchronized naked marathon. But the nudity was just the appetizer. The crowd started getting aggressive. They began throwing things at the Texas Rangers players, and because they had consumed tens of thousands of cups of beer, they had a lot of empty cups. They filled the cups with rocks, batteries and hot dogs and hurled them at the outfielders. Then the fireworks started. Literally, fans had smuggled M18 firecrackers into the stadium. They started throwing lit explosives into the Texas Ranger bullpen. The Texas pitchers had to evacuate their own warm-up area and hide in the dugout just to avoid being hit by a shrapnel. I want you to put yourself in the shoes of the stadium security. You're making minimum wage at 1974. You look at a crowd of 25,000 people who have collectively consumed estimated amount of 60,000 beers in 2 hours. They are naked, they are throwing batteries, they are detonating explosives. At what point do you just take off your yellow jacket, walk to your car and drive home? The umpires threatened to forfeit the game, but the Cleveland management begged them to keep playing, terrified that canceling the game would cause a full-scale riot. They didn't realize the riot was already here. Miraculously, the game actually made it to the 9th inning. The score was tied 5-5. The tension in stadium was suffocating. The air smelled like stale beer, urine and sulfur from the firecrackers. It was the bottom of the 9th. The Cleveland Indians had a man on the base. They had chance to win the game. All they needed was a single hit. But the crowd had completely lost interest in the rules of baseball. A 19-year-old fan, completely obliterated on dime beer, jumped the wall and sprinted right into field. He ran directly toward Texas Rangers outfielder Jeff Burroughs. The fan didn't just want to streak, he wanted a souvenir. He tried to snatch Burroughs' hat right off his head. Burroughs stepped back and the fan tripped and fell. But from the Texas Rangers dugout, manager Billy Martin didn't see a fan tripping. He saw a player being attacked by a Cleveland lunatic. Now, Billy Martin was not a man who de-escalated situations. He was a man who solved problems with violence. He grabbed a wooden baseball bat, screamed at his team, and charged out of the dugout, leading the entire Texas Rangers roster into the field to protect their teammate. When the 25,000 drunken Cleveland fans saw the Texas Ranger charging the field with bats, the riot ward achieved critical mass. The fans didn't boo, they didn't show cups, they invaded. Thousands of people poured over the walls and flooded the field. It was a human tidal wave of cheap beer and Rust Belt rage. But here is the most terrifying detail of the 10-cent beer night. When the fans stormed the field, they didn't bring baseball gloves to catch foul balls. They brought weapons. The fans who stormed the field pulled out heavy steel chains. They pulled out switchblade knives. Some of them had literally ripped the heavy iron and wood folding seats out of the concrete stadium foundations, and they were carrying them into the field like medieval shields. One guy was reportedly swinging a pair of nunchucks. Why did a guy bring a nunchucks on a Tuesday night baseball game? Beats me. Because it was 1974 and the world was a lawless wasteland. The Texas Rangers suddenly realized that they had made a catastrophic tactical error. They had charged onto the field with 25 wooden bats, and they were now surrounded by thousands of feral, heavily armed, blackout-drunk lunatics. They were completely trapped. The manager of the Cleveland Indians was a man named Ken Aspromonte. Aspromonte looked at the field and he saw the Texas Rangers. He saw the team he absolutely despised, the team he had brawled with a week ago, completely surrounded by a mob of his own fans. He saw the chains, he saw the knives. He realized that if he didn't do something immediately, he was going to watch a professional baseball team get murdered on live television. Aspromonte turned to the players. He didn't tell them to go to the locker room, he told them to grab their bats. In one of the most surreal cinematic moments in the history of sports, the Cleveland Indians charged out of their own dugout armed with Louisville Sluggers and sprinted into the mob to save their bitter rivals. Welcome to the survival void. The Cleveland players reached the Texan players and the two teams formed a defensive circle in the middle of the outfield. Rival athletes, men who hated each other, were now standing back to back, swinging heavy wooden baseball bats at the skulls of Cleveland fans just to keep the mob at bay. It was gladiatorial combat. It was the Warriors played on the baseball diamond. The chief umpire, Nestor Chilak, who was also trapped on the field, was hit in the head with a thrown stadium seat. He was bleeding profusely from his skull. He managed to grab a microphone and officially declared the game a forfeit in favor of Texas Rangers, before being escorted off the field by the players. Slowly, violently, the combined forces of Texas and Cleveland baseball teams managed to fight their way through the mob, retreating step by step, swinging their bats to clear a path, until they finally reached the safety of the fortified locker rooms. They locked the heavy steel doors behind them, listening to the mob pound on the walls. The fans, having successfully chased the athletes off the field, proceeded to tear the stadium apart. They stole the bases, they destroyed the dugouts. It took the arrival of Cleveland Police Department riot squad, armed with tear gas and batons, to finally clear the stadium. The aftermath of 10-cent beer night was a masterpiece of corporate backpedaling. The president of the American League was absolutely furious. The media condemned the city of Cleveland. The management of the Indians had to issue a growling public apology, admitting that perhaps selling unlimited alcohol for the price of a piece of chewing gum was a slight miscalculation in crowd control. But the most hilarious part? The Cleveland Indians actually held another cheap beer promotion later that same season. They just reduced the limit from 6 beers to 2, because capitalism never learns. It just adjusts the margins. 10-cent beer night is the ultimate autopsy of the social contract. It proves that the line between a civilized sporting event and a feral, weaponized mob is exactly 65 cents. We like to think that we are evolved, rational creatures. But this event proves that if you pull 25,000 people in a concrete ball, remove the financial barrier to intoxication, and give them an enemy, they will revert to the Stone Age in exactly 9 innings. Next time you go to a stadium and you complain about paying $14 for a plastic cup of watered down beer, don't get angry, be grateful. That $14 price tag is the only thing standing between you and a guy with nunchucks trying to steal your hat. Stay strange, stay sharp, and whatever you do, don't chart the mound. See ya.